So as we continue on with 2.8, notice that we've got some guidelines as we factor completely. So as we look at the steps, notice that step one is always to factor out the greatest common monomial factor. So we want to make sure that we're taking out what they have in common out of each term. And then we also want to look for a difference of two squares or a perfect square trinomial. So we want to look to see if we can factor further. So that's our step two. Step three is we want to factor a trinomial like we normally do. So whenever we can do that, we just want to go back to what we always are able to do. And then if we have more than our normal three terms, then that's when we want to go to our grouping, which is our last resort, basically. So as we look at example 2, the very first thing we want to do is always, just like we did before in 2.5 and 2.6, is we always want to take out a greatest common factor if we can. So as we look at A, our first example, we look to see what's our smallest number. So our smallest number is 3, and does 3 go into 6 evenly? It does. Does 3 go into 18 evenly? It does. So we know that we can take out a 3, and then we want to look to see what letter we have in common. So notice that they all have an x, and our smallest power of x is 1, and so that's how many we're going to take out. And then remember, we just divide. So we go 3 divided by 3, which is 1, and then we have 3 x's, and we take out 1, so we're left with 2. You have 6 divided by 3, which is 2. You had 2 x's and took 1 away, so you're left with 1. And then you have negative 18 divided by 3, which is negative 6. You had an x and you took an x out, so we're done. And then notice again, remember our steps were, well, if we had a power of 2 here, we are going to try to go further. And we go 1 times negative 6, which is negative 6. We list our factors. So 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. And we're looking for a pair that's going to give us a 2. And notice that if by adding or subtracting. So 1 plus 6 gives you 5, or 6 minus 1, or 1 plus 6 gives us 7, sorry, and 6 minus 1 is 5, or 2 plus 3 is 5, and 3 subtract 2 is 1. So nothing gives us 2 in the middle. So because there's nothing that gives us 2 in the middle, we know that we're done. And so this is our solution. When I look at example B, same idea. So we're first looking to see what we can divide out if we can. So we have a 7. Does 7 go into 28 evenly? It does. So we're going to write it down, and then we look for our letters. So we have 4 x's here and 2 x's here. So they both have an x, and our smaller power is 2. So the 2 is going to get written out, and then we divide. 7 divided by 7 is 1. You had 4 x's and took 2 of them out, so we're left with 2. And then negative 28 divided by 7 is negative 4. You had 2 x's and you took 2 out, so we're done. And then again, we have a power of 2. So we've talked about this. Whenever you have a power of 2, we look to see if we can go further. So we're going 1 times negative 4, which is negative 4. And our factors of 4 are 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. Now we're trying to get our middle number. So remember that this is really the same thing as saying 7x squared. And then this is 1x squared plus 0x minus 4. And so when I look for my numbers, I'm trying to find a pair that's going to give us a 0 in the middle. So as we look at that, 2 and 2 give us 0 in the middle if one of them is a negative. And so then we're just going to do our box over to this side. So we have 1x squared, we have negative 4, and the pair that we picked was negative 2x and positive 2x. And then we're just going to take out our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor of the first row is an x. Our greatest common factor of our second row is a 2. Greatest common factor of our first column is an x. Greatest common factor of our second column is a negative 2. And remember, we can check that as we're going along if you're not positive. Remember, we went x times x, which is 1x squared. And then x times negative 2 is negative 2x. And if we forget our minus sign there, or our negative sign, we're going to catch it. 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. So everything worked out. And so then our final solution is going to be 7x squared. And then because we could factor this x squared minus 4, we're going to get x plus 2 and x minus 2. And so this will be our final solution. But again, we're doing that. We're just checking as we go. The last thing that we're going to be asked to do is solve if we can. And so the same idea, our very first step, just like we had in before, is to make sure it's in standard form. So we have 2x to the third plus 8x squared. And then we're going to move that 10x to the other side. And when we move it to the other side, it changes the sign. And so we get minus 10x equals 0. And then we do the same thing. Our very first step is to take out the greatest common factor. So our smallest number is 2. And it checks out like it divides into 8 and 10 evenly. And then our letter that they have in common is an x, and our smallest power is 1, which is this one right here. And then we just divide out. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. We had 3 x's and we took 1 out, so we're left with 2. Positive 8 divided by 2 is 4. We had 2 x's and took 1 away, so we're left with 1. And then negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. We had an x and took an x out, so we're done. And then from here, we multiply a times c. So 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. Factors of negative 5 are 1 and 5. That's the only one. And we're trying to get a 4 in the middle. So to get 4 in the middle, we're going to have to go 5 subtract 1. And then we just want to double check. If I do 5 subtract 1, does it multiply to give you negative 5? And it does. So we're good. And then we're just going to do our box over to this side. And then we put in our value. Now remember, once you've factored out a greatest common factor, we don't use the original anymore. We're going to now use what our new values are. So we're going to do 1x squared, negative 5, and then the pair that I picked was negative 1x and 5x. So again, we don't use this one either. So like once we've taken out the greatest common factor, we don't use it anymore. And so we're going to take out the greatest common factor. So out of the first row, greatest common factor is x. Second row, greatest common factor is a 5. First column, greatest factor is an x. Second column, greatest common factor is a 1. And again, if we don't catch that negative sign, we will right now. X times x is x squared. X times 1, we need negative 1x, so it helps us see that we need that negative sign there. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. So if you do that check, that will always help you make sure your signs are right. And so we get 2x, and then our parentheses are x minus 1 and x plus 5. And so that's going to be our factoring completely. In 2.4, we'll talk about solving. So we're kind of doing this in a little bit of a different order. So I'm not going to do the solving part. We're just going to do the factoring part. All right. So we'll do 2.4 next time in class, and that we'll talk about how we are going to use that to solve. So as we look at our next little group, as we look at 3, we're going to change this just a tiny bit. Let's change or make some more space here. All right, so we're gonna not do these that have the equal sign today. All right, so as we look, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out the greatest common factor. So the biggest number is a 3, and they both have an x. And then we divide. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, with x squared left over. Negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4, with x left over. And then we're trying to find factors of 4 that give you 0 in the middle. And so that's going to give us x plus 2 and x minus 2. And as we go through the others, go ahead and keep trying that. Just make sure that you take out the greatest common factor first and then see what's left. If you're having a hard time, make sure you ask, and then we can talk about it. And the same thing, we're looking for factors in 9 that give us 6 in the middle. And you can do the box method, or you can do the cross, whatever, the crisscross one, whatever makes it easier for you. But again, as you do that box, you're going to notice that your factor is going to be the same here. And then this last one, the greatest common factor is an m out. And so this will be m squared minus 2m minus 8. And again, we're looking for factors of negative 8 that give you 2. So 4 and 2, this is going to be a negative. So we're going to have m minus 4, and m plus 2. Box method also works for that, but just be careful. Make sure that you pay attention to what's going on. And again, we're looking for factors of negative 4 that gave us 0. So as we looked for our pairs, I did do that. I just did it in my head. Box method always works for those. As we're solving with real life problems, it just gives you a terrarium in the shape of a rectangular prism, has a volume of 4608. This is going to be another one where we're going to have to solve. And so we're going to just hold off on this one and maybe hit it again when we do 2.4. So I'm just going to stop it for now.